Hey, this is the third video on the topic of evangelism. And, as pastors, as preachers, we evangelize every Sunday morning. We evangelize when we're teaching a Sunday school class or it's a small group. But I think the best evangelism happens when it's those one-on-one relationships. And I shared with you, Jesus had this large following, this mass of people, but he really honed in on these 12 disciples. And within those 12, he really kind of looked at these three and poured into these three. But regardless of how you're evangelizing, where you're evangelizing, what your audience is, I want to share with you two things that I think are important. And the first is you have to know your audience. So I was born and raised in the church. So I grew up with all the basic Sunday school stories. Like I know Adam and Eve, and I know David and Goliath, and I know all those Old Testament stories, and I know the New Testament stories and the miracles of Jesus, the parables of Jesus. And we take that for granted sometimes. And sometimes we just assume that our audience knows who we're talking about, knows what we're talking about. And the reality is there's a lot of people sitting in church pews who weren't brought up in the church and don't know those people and their stories. There's people that you're reaching out to, again, they don't have a clue what's in the Bible, who's in the Bible. And so don't take for granted that people just know. Don't ever assume that people just know. A good friend of mine, he's been in ministry his whole life, and he's preparing for retirement. But years ago, he took a church in Pennsylvania, and he said he hadn't been there very long, and he's preaching a story on what we would consider a basic Sunday school story. And as he's telling this account, he said his audience is just glued. They're on the edge of their seats. Their eyes are this big. And he stopped his sermon. He said, "Do you know who I'm talking about? Do you know their story?" He said the majority of his congregation just shook their head like, "We've never heard this before." And that's when it dawned on him, and he realized that even though he's pastoring a church, it was really full of unchurched people who weren't raised in Sunday school. And so he kind of had to stop and reset. And he said for the next year, he just preached basic Sunday school stories. And he had to give them a foundation of what was in Scripture, what was in the Old Testament, what was in the New Testament, who these people were and what their stories were, and how God and Jesus intersected in their lives. So don't ever take for granted that who you're talking to knows what you know, knows what's in the Bible and who's in the Bible. So you need to find out where they are and then start where they are. The second one that I would encourage you is tell them just enough. So when Rhonda and I were raising our two boys, they had questions about all kinds of stuff. And they had questions about life and the world and people and their bodies and relationships and all the things that we as humans growing up have to discover. And we learned real quick, when they would come and ask a question, regardless of what the question was, we would give their inquiring little minds just enough to satisfy that answer. We didn't want to drown them with tons of information. We didn't want to give them information that they weren't ready for. We didn't want to take them to the deep end that they didn't understand. We wanted to give them just enough. And the beauty in giving them just enough, it gave them time to process and think and figure that out. And then when they were ready to ask the next question, they would come back. And so know who your audience is and know where they are. Again, whether that's a congregation on Sunday morning or it's just a one-on-one relationship. And then when they ask questions or when you're presenting them with the gospel, just give them enough. Don't overload them so that they'll want to come back. Hey, keep your eyes wide open for opportunities of evangelism. I love you, and I'll see you next time.